The night of June 12, 2025, arrived with an unnatural quiet over the vast Iranian plateau. The silence was a prelude to a storm, a carefully orchestrated symphony of destruction that would forever alter the balance of power in the Middle East. It began not with a bang, but with a flicker. Across Iran, radar screens in heavily fortified air defense command centers suddenly went blank, their digital eyes blinded by invisible waves of electronic warfare. The operators, trained for this very moment, found themselves staring into a void. It was in this engineered darkness that the first wave of Israeli F-35Y Adir stealth fighters slipped across the border, their forms like ghosts against the moonless sky. This was the opening act of Operation Rising Lion. The operation was a breathtaking display of modern warfare, a fusion of kinetic force and digital sabotage. Over 200 Israeli aircraft, from the advanced F-35S to F-15S, laden with bunker-busting bombs and specialized Gulfstream jets humming with electronic disruption equipment, pierced deep into Iranian airspace. They flew through corridors of silence, created moments before by their counterparts in the cyber domain. The mission was not simply to bomb targets, it was to dismantle an entire strategic infrastructure with surgical precision. The world held its breath, witnessing a conflict that had been simmering for decades finally boil over into a direct, devastating confrontation between two of the region's most formidable adversaries. On the ground, the symphony reached its crescendo. Small, elite teams of operatives who had been dormant for months received their final activation signals. Their tasks were small but critical, disabling local communication arrays, marking primary targets with infrared beacons visible only to the incoming aircraft, and sowing confusion within the ranks of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC. These were the quiet, deadly notes in a much larger composition of war. The first explosions were not random. They were precise, hitting command bunkers, communication nodes, and power substations with an accuracy that spoke of months, if not years, of meticulous planning and intelligence gathering. The initial hours were a whirlwind of coordinated chaos. While aircraft hammered strategic sites from above, cyber warriors from Israel's famed Unit 8200 launched their own assault. They flooded Iran's national power grid with malicious code, causing localized blackouts that plunged key military installations into darkness. They infiltrated air traffic control systems, feeding false data to civilian towers to ensure the skies remained clear for the military sorties. This was a new kind of war, fought simultaneously in the physical and digital realms. For the people of Iran, the night was filled with the terrifying roar of jets, the thunder of distant explosions, and a growing sense of dread as the true scale of the attack began to dawn. The success of Operation Rising Lion hinged on a fundamental principle: you cannot fight what you cannot see. Long before the first F-35 crossed into Iranian airspace, a silent war was already being won in the digital ether. Israel's cyber warfare divisions had painstakingly mapped Iran's complex and layered air defense network, planting digital backdoors and dormant malware within its most protected systems. These ghosts in the machine were the key to the entire operation. When the order was given, these hidden programs sprang to life, systematically disabling radar installations near critical flight paths like those over Tabriz and Kashan. Iranian commanders found their most sophisticated Russian and domestically produced systems rendered useless, their screens showing empty skies as Israeli jets raced towards their targets. This digital paralysis was amplified by a campaign of electronic warfare launched from specialized Gulfstream G550 aircraft. These flying command posts emitted powerful electromagnetic pulses and jamming frequencies, creating a blanket of electronic noise that drowned out Iranian military communications. The IRGC's ability to coordinate a response was crippled from the outset. Orders could not be relayed, threat assessments could not be shared, and missile batteries could not receive accurate targeting data. The intricate web of command and control that Iran had spent years building was effectively severed, leaving individual units isolated and exposed. It was a masterclass in modern electronic combat, turning Iran's defensive shield into a porous, ineffective net. The cyber attack extended far beyond the military sphere, designed to induce national paralysis and psychological shock. Unit 8200 targeted Iran's critical civilian infrastructure to compound the chaos of the physical strikes. They disrupted the national internet, severing connections for millions of citizens, and making it impossible for independent information to spread. They hacked into the state-run media, briefly flashing messages of defiance on television screens before the broadcasts went dead. The national railway system was thrown into disarray as signals were scrambled, and parts of the banking system were temporarily frozen. The message was clear: no part of the Iranian state was safe from Israel's reach. This comprehensive digital assault was the culmination of years of covert intelligence work. It relied on human assets who provided access, on technical experts who identified vulnerabilities, and on strategists who understood how to weave these disparate threads into a single, cohesive plan. The infiltration was so deep that Israeli intelligence was not just disabling systems; in some cases they were actively manipulating them. They could see what the Iranian operators were seeing, or not seeing, in real time, allowing them to adjust their attack vectors on the fly. This unprecedented level of digital dominance ensured that Operation Rising Lion began with a decisive, almost insurmountable advantage for Israel. The primary objective of Operation Rising Lion was to surgically remove the heart of Iran's nuclear ambitions. The Isfahan nuclear facility, a linchpin of the program, suffered the most catastrophic damage. Wave after wave of Israeli jets pounded the complex, their precision munitions reducing key buildings to rubble. Satellite imagery released in the following days showed collapsed roofs, vast craters, and the blackened scars of widespread fires. The workshops responsible for uranium conversion and fuel production were obliterated. The attack on Isfahan was not just a setback, it was an attempt to erase decades of scientific progress and investment, sending a clear and brutal message about the perceived red lines of Israel. The Natanz facility, Iran's main enrichment site, was another prime target. While its deeply buried underground centrifuge halls proved resilient to conventional bombing, the surface infrastructure was devastated. Israeli bombs targeted the ventilation and power systems, crucial for the operation of the delicate centrifuges below. The goal was to render the underground halls inoperable by cutting off their life support. At the same time, the Fordow facility, buried deep within a mountain and considered nearly impenetrable, faced a different kind of assault. While physical damage was limited, it was reportedly hit by a sophisticated cyber attack, a logic bomb designed to cause the centrifuges to spin out of control and destroy themselves from within, a massive internal failure. Beyond the nuclear sites, the operation aimed to cripple Iran's ability to project power across the region. Israeli warplanes struck major missile depots and production facilities with ruthless efficiency. In Kermanshah, Tabriz, and Semnan, hangars storing Fateh 110 and Shahab 3 ballistic missiles were vaporized in massive secondary explosions that lit up the night sky for miles. The strikes were timed to catch many of the missiles in their hardened silos and storage bunkers, destroying not just the weapons but also the transport and launch systems required to deploy them. This part of the campaign was designed to blunt Iran's capacity for immediate and overwhelming retaliation, buying Israel critical time. The precision of these strikes was staggering, a testament to the quality of the intelligence that guided them. High-value targets were not just locations but also people. The attacks were timed to eliminate key personnel who were essential to the programs. Among the confirmed dead was Dr. Mohsen Tehranchi, a leading nuclear physicist who was killed in a targeted strike on a research lab in Tehran. General Reza Hosseini, the IRGC's air defense coordinator for the central region, was also eliminated in the opening hours, leaving the defensive response in disarray. The operation was a decapitation strike, aimed at both the hardware and the human expertise that made Iran a threshold nuclear state. Section 4, The Unfolding Aftermath, A Sky of Fire and a Land of Grief. Within hours of the initial Israeli assault, Iran's response came. The IRGC, though wounded and disoriented, unleashed a furious barrage of retaliation. Between 130 and 180 ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and Shahed-series drones streaked across the sky toward Israel. Sirens wailed across Tel Aviv, Haifa, and the southern city of Dimona, sending terrified citizens scrambling for shelters. It was the moment Israel had prepared for decades to face. The nation's formidable multi-layered defense system, comprising the Iron Dome, David Sling, and the exo-atmospheric Arrow 3, roared to life, its interceptors launching to meet the incoming threats in a deadly aerial ballet. The night sky over Israel was filled with explosions as most of the Iranian projectiles were successfully destroyed. However, no defense is perfect. A handful of missiles and drones managed to punch through the shield. In the port city of Haifa, a residential tower suffered a partial collapse after a direct hit, and a critical power substation was damaged, causing blackouts. Near Beersheba, another projectile struck, adding to the chaos. The human cost in Israel, while low compared to the scale of the Iranian attack, was still tragic. Initial reports confirmed 17 Israeli deaths and over 70 injuries, a grim reminder that even the most advanced technology cannot guarantee absolute safety. The psychological impact was immense, shattering the nation's sense of invulnerability and bringing the reality of the war home with brutal force. In Iran, the human cost was catastrophic. The official death toll, as reported by Iran's health ministry by June 15, climbed past 224, with hundreds more injured. The strikes had been precise, but many targets were located in or near urban areas, resulting in significant civilian casualties. Iran's foreign ministry claimed that 73 women and children were among the dead, including 20 children killed when a missile targeting a nearby military installation struck the Chamran residential complex in Tehran. Hospitals, already strained, were completely overwhelmed. They struggled to cope with the influx of casualties amidst power outages and dwindling medical supplies, creating scenes of chaos and desperation in emergency rooms across the country. The assault also killed several high-ranking IRGC officials, a severe blow to the regime's military leadership. Confirmed reports announced the deaths of Mohammad Kazemi, the powerful head of IRGC intelligence, and senior commanders General Hassan Mohageh and General Mohsen Bagheri. These losses created a power vacuum at the heart of Iran's security apparatus at the most critical moment. The combination of military losses, civilian deaths, and collapsing infrastructure ignited public fury. Protests erupted in Tehran, Shiraz, and Mossad, not in support of the regime, but against its failure to protect the nation. The government that had promised strength was now presiding over a scene of devastation and humiliation. Section 5, Whispers and Daggers, the Shadow War before the strike. The dramatic airstrikes of June 2025 were not the beginning of the conflict, but rather its violent public culmination. For months, even years prior, Israel's intelligence agency, the Mossad, had been waging a relentless shadow war deep inside Iran. This clandestine campaign was designed to degrade Iran's capabilities from within, to sow paranoia among its leadership, and to gather the critical intelligence needed for a large-scale military operation. It was a war fought with whispers and daggers, with computer code and covert operatives who moved like phantoms through one of the world's most monitored societies. This silent battle set the stage for the thunderous arrival of Operation Rising Lion. One of the most effective tactics in this shadow war was a campaign of targeted sabotage and mysterious accidents. Key logistical chains supplying the nuclear and missile programs were quietly disrupted. Shipments of specialized components would vanish in transit, or arrive with subtle, undetectable defects that would cause catastrophic failures later on. Unexplained explosions rocked sensitive military-industrial sites, with official explanations often blaming faulty wiring or gas leaks. These incidents were meticulously planned to appear random, but they systematically slowed progress and eroded the morale and confidence of the Iranian scientists and engineers who were working on these top-secret projects. Alongside sabotage, Mossad orchestrated a campaign to neutralize key human assets. A number of prominent Iranian nuclear scientists and missile experts met untimely ends in the months leading up to the attack. These deaths were often disguised as street crime, car accidents, or sudden health failures, but they formed a clear pattern for intelligence analysts. Each death removed irreplaceable knowledge from Iran's programs. At the same time, Mossad was actively recruiting sources within the Iranian establishment, leveraging discontent, greed, or ideology to gain access to the regime's most sensitive secrets. These human intelligence assets provided the final pieces of the puzzle, confirming target locations and leadership routines. When the time came for the strike, this network of spies played its final crucial role. Operatives on the ground provided last-minute verification of intelligence, ensuring that the Israeli jets were not striking empty buildings or decoy sites. They assisted in marking targets and carrying out pre-strike acts of minor sabotage to maximize confusion. Once their missions were complete, many of these operatives were exfiltrated through carefully prepared escape routes, melting away across the borders of Kurdistan, Azerbaijan, and Armenia. The success of this sprawling long-term intelligence operation was just as important as the military hardware. It was the unseen foundation upon which the entire audacious strike was built. Section 6. A New Abyss. The World After the Lion's Roar. The world watched the unfolding crisis with a mixture of shock and trepidation, as the international community fractured along predictable lines. The United States, while denying any direct military participation, acknowledged sharing intelligence with affirming Israel's right to self-defense while publicly urging de-escalation. Washington's most decisive move was to use its veto power to block Iran's request for an emergency session of the UN Security Council, effectively shielding Israel from immediate international censure. In contrast, Russia and China vehemently condemned the attack. Moscow decried it as a grave breach of international law, while Beijing warned of catastrophic regional destabilization and signaled a readiness to deepen its strategic support for Tehran. European powers were divided. The United Kingdom and France offered veiled statements of support for Israel, framing the operation within the context of preventing nuclear proliferation. Germany and the broader European Union, however, adopted a more cautious tone, calling for an immediate ceasefire and a return to diplomacy, fearful of a wider conflagration that could disrupt global energy markets and trigger a new refugee crisis. In the Middle East, the reaction was a quiet earthquake. Saudi Arabia, the UAE and Bahrain, partners in the Abraham Accords, silently reinforced their security pacts with Israel. Jordan reportedly granted Israeli jets limited and clandestine access to its airspace, a risky but calculated move. The G7 summit, convening just days after the initial strikes, found its agenda completely dominated by the crisis. For Iran, the attack was a strategic catastrophe. Analysts estimated that the damage had set back its nuclear program by at least 3 to 5 years. In response, Tehran's leadership, reeling from the blow, announced a strategic realignment. It vowed to accelerate its nuclear activities beyond all previous limits and to seek deeper, more formal defense pacts with its allies. Unconfirmed reports circulated of an emergency deal with Russia for the advanced S-500 air defense system and new agreements with China and North Korea for military technology. The attack, intended to neutralize a threat, had instead pushed Iran to abandon any pretense of restraint and seek protection from global powers hostile to the West. The dust from Operation Rising Lion has yet to settle, and the region now stands on the precipice of a new, more dangerous era. The strikes have continued for days, with Israeli attacks reaching the capital, Tehran and Hezbollah retaliating with rocket fire into northern Israel. The operation shattered the long-held doctrine of shadow warfare and plausible deniability, ushering in an age of direct state-on-state conflict. What happens next remains a terrifyingly open question. Will Iran's retaliation escalate into a full-scale regional war? Can international diplomacy contain the fallout? Or was Operation Rising Lion simply the opening salvo in a much longer and bloodier struggle for dominance in the Middle East? The world waits, hoping the abyss does not stare back.